Good morning, Happy Valley, and welcome back to another edition of the Penn State 365 podcast. I'm your host, Richie O'Leary, and joined today with special guest from Locked On Nittany Lions podcast, Zack Seyko. Zack, it's been an interesting 5-6 days now, probably about a week for Penn State. There's been some ups, there's been some downs. I guess let's just start with the downs. It's the biggest news of the week for Penn State. Two players, two significant contributors last year, and Kaveion Keys, linebacker, and defensive end Jameial Lyons are both not even kicked off the team, but not even enrolled in the university anymore. What are your just overall thoughts on that before we go any further?
I mean, I've discussed this a lot over on my show, is that these two were expected to contribute a lot more, either be rotational players, but they weren't fringe on the depth chart. From what I gathered, Jameial Lyons was supposed to be the new Dennis Sutton in comparison to 2023's team, where Carter, Dennis Sutton would be your starting defensive ends, and then Lyons would rotate in between the two of them. That's how good he was supposed to be. And then Keys, not as much, but you would hear from a fellow teammate or an assistant coach saying, hey, who's that freshman player? Who's that youngster that has stepped up in the offseason or has done well in practice? And then Kaveion Keys would get recognized verbally. So to say that, I mean, this is obviously a very serious situation. If it wasn't for all, what is being said and how serious it is, I mean, this is kind of comparable in a sense to two season-ending injuries to key players. But this is obviously something completely different. But Penn State has to be able to overcome it. And I think there is that emotional side to it as well, just because of what is going on and how it happened so abruptly.
Yeah, so as of last week, for you guys that don't know, first media session, they were both announced by a Penn State spokesperson as interim suspensions, but 3-4 days later, not even, and then they were just removed completely from the student database, and now they're completely off the team, according to that same Penn State spokesperson. Like you said, Kaveion Keys has been mentioned in practice quite a few times. Here in developmental squad, defensive player of the year, and developmental squad special teams player of the year last year. So maybe not appearing in many games. I think it was only 2 last year as a true freshman, so technically redshirted, but still a guy that was going to play probably some significant snaps at outside linebacker. Now, losing these two, I find it interesting that they won't talk about them at all. Now, that might be a legality reason. If you had to guess, they also won't talk. They said before the presser at Media Day this weekend that they weren't going to talk about them. They said last week they weren't going to comment on it. Yeah. It's getting to the point where you got to say something, I feel like. Am I wrong? But if it's legal issues, then I guess you can't really say something. But the fact that they went from interim suspension to completely kicked out of the university, it seems like, in 3 days, tells me it's got to be something major.
It's difficult for me to discuss this as well at this point, too, just because we don't have a lot of legitimate information. If you read message boards, if you read social media sites like Reddit, of course, there's allegations circulating that are obviously very severe. Okay, we can address that. And there was clearly at Media Day an elephant in the room. They make that statement. I figured that James Franklin would say something along the lines of, we have removed Keys and Lyons from the team, just a short statement, but to at least address it. And there's been nothing. I think it has to do with that. I don't think Penn State can comment on it. I think that's where we're at, but that's my assumption. I don't have any reporting to back that up. So until we hear from a party, whether that's Penn State or another institution that could happen to get involved, until we get legitimate information and not an anonymous user commenting on this situation on the internet, I don't want to push this conversation further, because that's why Penn State is not saying anything, because everything is innocent until proven guilty. But obviously nothing looks good here when you have to suspend and then expel people before the season even begins like this.
Yeah, so now kind of moving on from this slightly, now this is going to affect the defensive end rotation big time. Zariah Fisher's out with a significant injury. Now you're going to lose Jameial Lyons. Amin Vanover's back, but how much can you really count on him? Can Smith-Vilbert step up? What do you kind of see with this defensive end room currently?
James Franklin said at Media Day, and he's actually said it multiple times without being provoked. And we're not asked directly about Amin Vanover, but he constantly reminds us that we as the media are not talking about him enough. I like Vanover as a run defender more so than I do a pass rusher. That's me personally. But I think he becomes that player that rotates in between Carter and Dennis Sutton. You're almost forced to put Carter at defensive end now, more so than you are linebacker. You kind of have to, I don't know, you're going to have to take your medicine one way or the other here, because if you move Carter to linebacker, you limit your depth at defensive end, because like you said, they're without Fisher, even though there's optimism that he will be back. Same thing goes for linebacker. They had that injury with Keon Wiley. And what's his timetable to return? He was supposed to have that kind of breakout season. And when you move Abdul Carter down to defensive end, that's the player that you look at and say, okay, the reason for Carter to move to the defensive line is because you have a player like Wiley, he gets hurt, and then that decision's put in doubt from a depth perspective. They can't afford another injury at either spot, defensive end or linebacker, and you need to find a way without rushing them to get Fisher and Wiley back. I don't even think you can wait till 100%. If they can give you 15, 20 snaps a game to start, and that means getting them back by week 4, I say do it. I don't say wait any longer to get them close to 100%. I don't think you can afford it.
Yeah, I know you mentioned it a little bit about the linebacker room, but how important is a guy like Tony Rojas to step up in year 2 now? Just because there's, like you said, not even just no depth behind him, but now this guy's just getting thrusted into a starting role.
Tamir Robinson's in that exact same conversation as well, because he kind of vaults forward. When I was at practice on Saturday, there was media day and then an adjacent practice that followed. It looked like the way the depth chart is aligning right now is, if you were running a 4-3, I imagine they're going to run a 4-2-5 because they have more safety talent than they do linebacker depth and talent. But it's Dom DeLuca, Kobe King, and Tony Rojas as that off-ball linebacker replacing Abdul Carter when he's playing defensive end. Then behind them, it's Tamir Robinson, Tyler Elsdon, and Kari Jackson. That's an interesting one, that Jackson becomes that next 2 deep linebacker as a true freshman. Again, this is a practice. This is a practice, but when you do these drills, you don't just do them willy-nilly. The 4th string players aren't going first. The guys who set the tone are your starters, or your all-conference contenders in Kobe King, Dom DeLuca, and the potential of Tony Rojas. And then you go to the next, and then you go to next man up. It's not whoever your walk-on freshman is. That's not who's going up first in the drill. You have to set the tone. So I buy this, even though I will take it a little lighter in the sense, but we have at least a picture of what the linebacker room could look like for the 6 rotational players at that spot in a 4-3.
Now, I want to flip to the opposite side of the ball. Something that James Franklin said this weekend at Media Day. He was asked about Julian Fleming. Of course, everyone thinks this former 4-star, I think he was borderline 5-star, is just going to come in and take that wide receiver 1 spot. James Franklin was a little coy when talking about Fleming. He said, I think he's solid. He's been pretty solid this spring. He kept using the word solid. Solid doesn't sound like superstar to me.
It's the same conversation over and over. I think it goes back to last year when it was just how Wallace and Keandre Lambert-Smith were in front of the group, but nobody was standing out. So even though KLS and Wallace were getting praise at the time, it was still pretty limited. There's just the wide receiver room, kind of the same thing. There's an elephant here. Why is nobody developing? Why is nobody taking that next step forward? I'm not expecting a superstar, but I at least want to hear some optimism and some confidence that, okay, you tell me all the time, Coach, that there's all this talent, then it's not a talent issue. We've been told that time and time again, word for word. It is not a talent issue. So what the heck is it? What is it? Julian Fleming was a former 5-star. He just got finished, 4 or 5 years at Ohio State. He has to be talented, right? I went on my show and I said that, hey, here are your depth chart battles. Here are your training camp battles. And I said it is not a guarantee that Julian Fleming starts. I am glad that that take is starting to at least be a little more accurate day by day. I don't want Julian Fleming to be benched. That's not what I'm here to root for. But everyone said, oh, you're crazy if you think Fleming's just going to ride the bench. I never said that, but I don't think he starts. I think Amari Evans is there pushing for snaps, and you are not going to see Fleming play 100% of snaps week in or week out. It's going to be very relevant to the game situation.
Yeah, see, Amari Evans is the one that intrigues me. And I thought after his freshman year, he showed a couple flashes, and I thought he could be that guy. That speed is unheard of, at wide receiver especially. But then last year he was in no man's land. I think he was just MIA completely. So, I mean, I would love to see him step up, but at some point you'd also like to see Harrison Wallace, do something or stay healthy. That'd be also helpful.
I think it helps. The health is the biggest concern there. And I think that's what what kind of staggered his development, because I think the anticipation was that Wallace would eventually progress to where he would become that true X receiver, the number one in the offense. And then a broken collarbone, right? Just a litany of different injuries, couldn't stay on the football field. And then again, that just kind of like with these, with prospects that Penn State has taken in the past from 2023, 2024, right? They develop an injury or suffer an injury in high school. It obviously ruins their season. It stunts their high school career, and they have to work their way back, and Penn State's still willing to take a chance on them. I think that's kind of the same conversation with Trey Wallace, is that you just have to be patient. You hope that he stays 110% so that he can, because he's a former 4-star. Like he's well regarded. He was recruited by SEC schools. So Wallace isn't a fringe prospect or anything. He can be a number one, but he has to stay on the football field to be able to do that, obviously.
And another guy you want to talk about, 4-stars, Caden Saunders was a top 70, top 80 recruit overall.
Yeah.
And just has been, again, MIA. These guys just, I don't know what happens when it comes to getting to Penn State. They're highly ranked. They look great in high school. They get to Penn State, and it's like, I remember that guy. He was pretty good in high school. He didn't do anything here, but like I just don't understand. It's mind-boggling. And you hope Hagans and Koltonicky can get something out of him this year.
I mean, there's the inverse of that too, right? You look at an Abdul Carter who was barely a 4-star, and he's going to be a first-round pick. KJ Winston, a solid 4-star, but obviously they are playing to the likes of 5-star talent. But what do those two elements have in common? I'm naming defensive players that continue to develop and push past their ranking, and offensive players. Drew Aller, 5-star, hasn't lived up to that, right? And then Amari Evans, or I guess Amari Evans was more of a 3-star, but a Caden Saunders, as you mentioned, a higher end 4-star. I think across the board he was almost a 5-star consensus. Almost, he was close, and he obviously has not lived up to that, and has been, because those were lofty expectations. But his size, his frame, he's admitted to us that it was a little overwhelming when he first came into camp, just being a smaller stature wide receiver. And now that's caught up. It's taken some time. So is this the season where we finally put all that development aside and he can actually make an impact? Or is it still going to be he's just not cut out for it because he just has a smaller frame as a wide receiver?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how they use him too, because he's such a special player when he has a ball in his hands. And if you can't get him the ball through the air, run a couple end arounds, do something, get him the ball in space and see what he can do.
Motion, jet sweeps.
Yeah, we know Koltonicky a big guy when it comes to pre-snap motions and all that. So we'll see what happens in that aspect. But another thing that was kind of interesting is we talked to Drew Aller at Media Day, and he said he actually dropped 10 to 15 pounds this offseason, and that was part of adjusting to Koltonicky's offense. So will we see him a little bit more mobile this season?
I mean, we saw him plenty mobile last season. I don't know why the 5-star quarterback is running quarterback draws against Michigan, right?
That's true.
So now you see why the offensive coordinator switch made a change. And then there's some information going around on X, or at least a debate, as far as Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen had 9 carries against Ohio State. And it's just kind of like these small things that you don't read into as much initially. But then when you look back, hindsight's 2020, and it's no wonder that Penn State made this change. The way that Drew Aller was utilized made no sense to me, especially in the biggest games of the season. Your 5-star quarterback, pocket passer, even though he can move, somehow became a dual threat quarterback against Michigan, and that's fine. Michigan's defense is really good and made every quarterback look silly. But why was the initiative to take the ball out of Drew's hands and have him tuck the football rather than throw it and at least build some confidence? And James Franklin pointed that out a lot. We're not building Drew, even though he didn't say it outright. He said we did not build our quarterback's confidence enough, implying it by giving him some easy throws, play action, just to at least keep the defense honest. And that goes back to the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and Mike Yursich was a special one, but I got to give Mike Gundy credit. Somehow he gets these guys hired at other Power 4, Power 5 jobs, whatever you want to call it, and they just don't have any type of success. It's clear as day Mike Gundy calls that offense, but like Yursich, for example, he had some good games at, I shouldn't say good, decent games at Texas, and then early on in his Penn State career, he looked great, and then all of a sudden, hey, here's your stud quarterback, here's your solid offensive line, here's 2-star running backs. What can you do? Nothing.
I think everything goes hand in hand with that too. Even though my biggest concern is the offensive line, Wide receivers still have to do a lot of proving. You have Drew Aller, you have Nicholas Singleton, you have Kaytron Allen as that trio of playmakers. You couldn't have asked for a better situation if you're Andy Kotelnicki. But that's all those things will kind of take care of itself. So yes, I have my concerns about the offensive line, but when Kotelnicki at his core is an offensive line and a tight ends guy, I feel confident that okay, this won't be a glaring issue, even though they'll have some issues to work out. It's not going to be an overarching like, man, the offensive line's terrible. Kotelnicki will be able to do things to make up for those shortcomings. Same thing with the wide receivers. Okay, they're lacking in this area, but Kotelnicki, and that's what an offensive coordinator is supposed to do, kind of mask those problems and really and disguise them, and then really push forward what they do well, the talents that they have, and make those as best as they can be while limiting what they do not do well.
Yeah, and let me ask you about the offensive line, because you went to practice last week, and you saw some interesting things going on. You saw a certain guard snapping to Drew Aller, and then you saw a different guy at guard. So talk a little bit about Vega playing center and J.B. Nelson filling in at guard.
Yeah, so I think this is just insurance at the end of the day. There's the debate, is there a battle at center? And it's like Nick Dawkins has been around for such a long time. He is the vocal leader in the room. That's what you want as a center, the guy who is going to command the offense, be that voice of the offense. And Nick Dawkins is just that. From a personality standpoint, he's battled injuries himself. I am confident that he's the starting center. When I see Vanga Ioane or anybody else, if they're going to have Cooper Cousins take snaps as well, that's essentially to create depth. I don't think Dawkins' job is at risk. I think Penn State likes him a lot. Where I am concerned is I don't know that Drew Shelton is the left tackle of the future. Came in and played for 4 games when Olu Fashanu was hurt that season. Yeah. He performed well for a true freshman, but he wasn't great. You look at the PFF scoring, and it's like, okay, you understand he's a true freshman, and Penn State designed plays that, took the responsibility. He just needed to go in and be a placeholder, and he did that. Battled injuries, and then, we're going to move him to the right side to kind of push Caden Wallace. Now he's back on the left tackle spot, and Javen Williams, a former 5-star, isn't putting it all together just yet as well. I don't know what their plan is at left tackle. I am imagining, this is my opinion, that J.B. Nelson is eventually going to kick out to left tackle. Drew Shelton might start the season at left tackle, but I don't think he finishes there. I think eventually you'll have J.B. Nelson, because James Franklin has said that. Oh, we like J.B. Nelson's versatility. We think he can play tackle for us. We think he could even play center. It's that mention of tackle. I think eventually you're going to get a line, if everybody's healthy, where it's Nelson, Vanga Ioane, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, and probably Anthony Donko at right tackle, or Nolan Rucci as co-starters. But I think Donko offers a little more upside than Rucci at this point. They're going to take the 2 best tackles. Maybe they move Donko to left. I think that's down the road. But I would say that Nelson's going to be your left tackle eventually, and then some combination of Donko and Rucci over on the right side.
Yeah, it's not crazy either. I remember Donko in high school, and he just had a freaky long wingspan that just really disrupts the edge rushers and doesn't let him get around him. Even if he misses a step in speed, he still is able to catch up with that long, lengthy wingspan. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. And then Chim Diono apparently was making a little bit of noise. Now he's not going to be a starter, maybe not even like a first guy off the bench tackle, but another tackle that if Drew Shelton doesn't work out, you can kind of switch and rotate these guys and kind of figure out your best 5.
And I think that's why Penn State's tried to take it. They've tried to take 4 or 5 offensive linemen like this. It's just the more you have, the more insurance you have, the better odds you have. Because Alex Birchmeier hasn't worked out to this point. Javen Williams, I don't want to label him as a bust. He's still a young football player. He hasn't been with the program for the longest time. But you imagine, I don't want to speak for everybody, but the natural transition was supposed to be Olu Fashanu to Javen Williams. And it hasn't been that. You've had to go into the transfer portal to recruit more offensive linemen. Cooper Cousins seems to be breaking that trend as a player that's just going to, and Anthony Donko too, but those 2 together, everybody else, it's like you're waiting for them. You have to be patient with Chim Diono, even though he has promise. You have to be patient with Alex Birchmeier. You have to be patient with Javen Williams. It's a good thing that Anthony Donko and Cooper Cousins offer that immediate upside, because those other 3 players have not lived up to expectations.
Now we've talked about just about every position on the team so far, except cornerback. Cornerback's really intriguing to me because I feel like the past couple years with with Kalen King, with Joey Porter Jr., you always had that top guy. This year, it's a little bit more intriguing. You have a guy like Jalen Kimber coming in who has some experience at least. A.J. Harris has the highly ranked recruiting profile. Cam Miller is probably the most experienced of the bunch in terms of Penn State experience. Where do they kind of sit with that group?
I think they're better, and I don't want to go ahead and say that they're a lot better, but I'm confident now that I look at this group of an A.J. Harris, a Cam Miller, or a Jalen Kimber, compared to Daquan Hardy, Kalen King, and Johnny Dixon. I know why Johnny Dixon doesn't have an NFL career. It's unfortunate, right? He's dealing with the injuries and won't be able to have a playing career moving forward. And I just wish him kind of similar to Journey Brown. Had a lot of potential, but this is why it's not working out, and it's really a damn shame. But we saw with the draft scouting reports, Daquan Hardy, gets taken by the Buffalo Bills, but more for his special teams capabilities, and we'll see how he does and eventually moves into a full-time cornerback spot if that's what his future holds. And then Kalen King, mock drafts, Pro Football Focus, everybody had Kalen King solidly in the first round as maybe a top 15, top 20 pick, and then almost goes undrafted. So now we get a better sense of maybe the secondary just wasn't that good after Joey Porter Jr., that the defensive line, the safeties really helped mask, and along with scheme, just how, I don't want to say limited because they were good, but were they that good? Was that trio of Kalen King and Daquan Hardy and Johnny Dixon really that good? Well, from the sounds of it, that this group is at least more athletic. A.J. Harris, Cam Miller, Jalen Kimber, Davian Collins, this new group of veteran cornerbacks offers a lot more athleticism. And then you couple in the safeties, Jalen Reed, KJ Winston, Zach Wheatley. They're going to run a 4-2-5 because they have three. Those are three future NFL starters or NFL playmakers at the end of the day, those three safeties. So the secondary, I think, is what I'll back up Tom Allen, is a strength now because it did improve in comparison to what you had a season ago. That's a fact.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be very interesting. Now, these guys don't all have a ton of experience, so that's where it's a little questionable. But I think you're right. I think they're very talented, and I think they have the potential to be a pretty damn good defensive back unit, especially with Terry Smith, especially with I can't remember his name for some reason. The other DB's coach.
Anthony Poindexter?
Poindexter, yep. Yeah. I knew it was Poindexter. But with those two developing guys, I think they'll be perfectly fine. But anything else on the team before we switch a little bit to recruiting?
I think Justin Lustig was very direct with us as far as who Caden Saunders is going to be your starting punt returner until further notice. Anthony Ivey, Tyser Denmark. Other guys are in the mix, but it is Caden Saunders well out in front. From the way, and I like that he was direct with the question. Normally you get that, is there a competition? Because I asked Coach Sider, I said, hey, is there a competition for the third running back spot? And he's like, well, there's always a competition. We don't want Singleton and Allen to feel comfortable. Corey Smith is good. Quentin Martin enrolled early. Cam Wallace has developed very nicely. He kind of gave praise to everybody. And Justin Lustig was like, oh, yeah, it's Caden Saunders. He's out in front. Here are some other guys that you need to watch out for. And I like that. And that's just, that's a difference in personality because I totally get where Sider's coming from because any of those running backs could go in at any time. You don't want to have a rotational system at punt returner. You want a punt returner and you want it to be left at that. You want a place kicker and you want it to be left at that. You don't want an ongoing competition and a stable of punt returners. So I get that.
Yeah. Now moving on to recruiting a little bit, some pretty big news this weekend. Not one, not two, but three commitments in the past couple days. I guess let's just start from the beginning. Let's start from the end. 2025 wide receiver recruit, 4-star Koby Howard from Florida is coming up to Penn State after a couple months of debating whether it seemed that they were going to take him or not. But in the end, he ended up at Penn State, went to Lash Bash, worked out for the coaches, and that was pretty much it. What do you think? Is Penn State getting a legitimate 4-star here, or what do you kind of think of him?
You know this better than I do because you are a little more well-connected with recruiting and everything. One of my frequent guests on my show, Brian Smith, has a very good working relationship with the coaching staff down at Koby Howard's high school. And for the longest, for about 2 months straight, he was telling me it really seems like Howard's going to end up at Penn State, and he was giving me about a 99% chance, unless something crazy happens. Yeah. Howard is going somewhere else. That's the crazy thing would need to happen where he doesn't end up at Penn State. Mm-hmm. So this was just a matter of working out something. Suffered a really bad injury in his high school career, but Penn State, that hasn't scared Penn State away. That's never scared Penn State away. And I named a few other prospects before. Peter Gonzalez is somebody that they took a chance on despite having an injury. And I know he's proven that he's recovered from that, but that doesn't scare Penn State away. Tamir Robinson, same case. And then how about playing time with transfer and eligibility problems? T.A. Cunningham, Keandre Barker. It hasn't stopped them before, so why should it stop them with Koby Howard? And then Koby Howard's a really good route runner. Because of that leg injury, it limits his overall top-end speed. So then, okay, Caden Saunders, Liam Clifford, he falls into that category as opposed to what J. Steer Rogers offers in 2026. Lavar Keys, that's speedy. Amari Evans, where it's just pure speed at the base, at the core. He's more that route runner, short spaces, great off the line of scrimmage. And I think there is optimism here, but don't expect him to come in and compete right away. I think it is going to take 2 or maybe even 3 years before we see a true impact.
Yeah, definitely got to get him in the strength and conditioning program. Like you said, great route runner. Had some decent speed numbers before in his sophomore year before suffering the injury. Right. He's pretty vocal about the injury. He told me straight up, like, you could post this, you could add this if you want, you don't have to. It was a broken tibia and a broken fibula in the same leg his sophomore year. So that's a hell of a thing to recover from. It's
as a teenager.
I mean, yeah, as a teenager. It's insane. But he bounced back a little bit last year. Now, he didn't put up the greatest of numbers, but there's a reason he's still a top 150 4-star ranked kid. Like, the kid has a lot of potential. He was at the Rivals 5-star showcase, what was it, beginning of July, I believe it was, middle of July? I forget when whatever it was. And that's against the best of the best. He had a couple catches, and you could see it on our front page, one where he just high points the ball perfectly. He's able to jump over everyone. Now, that speed's still not there, but I think it's going to catch back up to him. And I think he'll be able to up his speed numbers this year. And then once you get in that college strength and conditioning program, all bets are off. I think they should be able to get him up to like maybe the 4.5s. I know he ran a 4.6 at the recent camp. But if you can get him to 4.5s, I think that's all you really need for a guy that's legitimate 6'1", 175, 180-ish already. Turn some of that to muscle, and there you go. But, yeah, I think this is a pretty good get for Penn State.
You need wide receivers. Rivals has him as a 4-star, if I'm not mistaken. So you get a 4-star wide receiver. You are able to go into the state of Florida and get another prospect. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can look at this as a victory. I don't think Penn State is settling because they wouldn't have taken the commitment if they did not want him. He had Ole Miss was making a push. Florida State were in that conversation as well. You were able to fend off the local schools. He was being recruited by SEC schools. So this is, Penn State, I've seen that Penn State went way down their big board. They passed up on others. Mm-hmm. That if they really felt that strongly about it, they wouldn't have taken him as a commitment. That's why he had to come back up to the Lash Bash. He had to test. There's just concerns regarding his recovery. It's not that they don't view him as a playmaker or a good football player or a problem prospect. They view him with a lot of potential. It's just, is he recovering from what he sustained earlier in his high school career? And clearly that is the case.
Mm-hmm. That is a little bit of a concern, but like you said, end of the day, he did like Penn State from the get-go. He's very excited about it. I don't know if you saw our video or not with him and his commitment. He was very excited to throw on the hat, say we are. All that good stuff. Now, of course, with Florida kids, you always have to be a little bit worried because he technically did have official visits scheduled to Florida State and Florida for, I believe, it was September and October. So you always got to keep an eye on that because if he shows out in one of these games, his first game's on ESPN against St. John Bosco on ESPN national TV, he shows out in that game, I could see one of those Florida schools being like, all right, hold on, let's get you back on campus.
Well, Florida can try. Billy Napier can try.
Florida might be done. I think Florida State... You can argue Florida might just be done because they're a mess.
That's okay.
That program's a totally different animal over there. But besides the point, they also landed 2026 wide receiver Lavar Keys. He's a little bit different. He's actually the complete opposite. He's 5'9", 5'9.5" maybe on a good day. Very big speedster coming up out of DeMatha. Now DeMatha, of course, produces, I don't even know, like 10 to 15 like D1 kids per year.
Yeah.
I'm not saying just FBS. I'm talking about FBS, FCS, D1, G5, whatever.
Yep.
This is a kid that's a really big speedster. Ran a 4.3 at the Lash Bash camp, whiteout Lash Bash camp, whatever you want to call it, and just really showed out to the staff, and that was it. And that as soon as they saw that, they're like, "Oh, get him on campus." What do you think about him so far?
You summed it up all perfectly. There's still, there's limited tape because he is a rising junior, but you can see now Jasir Rogers and Lavar Keys share a lot in common. That's to fit what Andy Kotelnicki is trying to do with speed, deception, motion, pre-snap movement. That's the key word here, movement. Keys and Rogers can move. They can move quickly, and they can stretch the field. They can beat the defense over the top. So that is what I think Penn State, again, especially with these kinds of commitments, even though there might be questions, and it's like, okay, why is Key? You don't take this commitment if you don't believe in them, and especially for 2026. This is different if it's 25 and later in the cycle, but this is 26, well out in front of the heart of the cycle, and they're taking that verbal commitment now because he's obviously shown them something that we're not seeing on the huddle film or on YouTube or anything else.
Yeah, and this is their sixth commit in the 2026 class, so they're already filling up pretty quickly. 2 wide receivers, an offensive lineman, obviously a defensive end they just got, and Daniel Jennings, who me and Dylan talked about on a recent pod. And then Troy Hun, 4-star quarterback, 4-star running back, Messiah Mickens. Do you think this ends up being a top 10 class?
I've said it. I think it can be a top 5 class. I think at a minimum you're getting a top 10 class with the potential of a top 5. You have a top 10, as you mentioned, top 10 quarterback, consensus, top 10 running back, consensus. I think eventually Rodgers can be a top 10 or a top 15 wide receiver. He's just in the state of Delaware, but Penn State has seen, and there's a highlight of him. I don't know everybody's going to win their respective battles, but there's a highlight of Rodgers beating the coverage of a Ohio State commit. So it's not like, oh, he's just beating up on 1A, 2A type of talent in retrospect to Pennsylvania. I don't know how it works at the high school level in Delaware. But he's not just winning reps against not comparable competition. He's going to these camps, he's showing out, and at Penn State, if he wasn't doing that at those camps, then Penn State wouldn't have taken his commitment. So he's beating the comparable competition at these 7-on-7s, at these training camps that we don't see, we hear about, but if he's winning reps against Ohio State commits, then by all means, absolutely take his commitment.
Oh, it's huge, yeah. Last but not least, they had a actually, real quick before we go past the Lavar Keys talk. Apparently, Lavar Keys was named after LaVar Arrington. Dad was a big fan of Penn State, and now he's going to play alongside LaVar Arrington II. That's just a crazy coincidence right there.
I think what I like about recruiting above all else for Penn State is that they go get players that are big fans of Penn State University, that actually will bleed blue and white. Because I feel like a lot of these other players, they go to programs, especially now with the NIL, or, we can leave if it doesn't work out of the transfer portal. You are getting players that are truly that 100, 110% locked in, or whatever, 107%, my commitment shut down. But I feel like everybody that does commit, for the most part, is a fan of Penn State through and through. They're not just going there to play football. They're going there because they actually like it there.
Yeah. No, it's just it is kind of crazy to see that, though. Now, something that's even crazier is a 2027 commit. There's
sure,
only
why not?
about 6 of them in the country, and there is 6 of them in the country, and Penn State has one of them in Kemon Spell out of McKeesport, Pennsylvania. What was your kind of reaction when you saw this kid commit? I know I was personally like, what's a freshman in high school?
This is comparable to them taking Messiah Mickens very early. This is the face of your class of 2027. They have seen, again, he's unranked, or he's only played 1 season of high school football. How good can he possibly be? Again, what is he showing at these training camps, at these 7-on-7s, these workouts in the offseason that Penn State has seen, that Penn State has scouted, that they feel like now in 2024, let's take a commitment from this player in 2027. I think what this really shows is that Penn State just continues to eat Pat Narduzzi's lunch. They take his lunch money and they eat his lunch on top of it. Pittsburgh, there's no excuse for the Panthers to not be in on this recruitment, and yet that's the case. He commits to Penn State. He doesn't say, well, I'm going to weigh my options. You know, I'm from McKeesport, for crying out loud. That is not far from the city whatsoever. That's not far from Oakland. And it felt like at the end of the day, Pitt never really had a shot.
Yeah, now it's interesting. I do want to talk about the whole Pittsburgh thing in a second, but if you look at his numbers, 17 carries for 271 yards, that's almost 16 yards a carry. Now, it's not a big number, 271 yards, but that's a crazy number right there. On top of that, he's got 540 total all-purpose yards, plays receiver, does kick returns, does punt returns, and he's a hell of a defender, too, at safety. Now, I think this just speaks more towards Juwan Sider just being that guy. Like, he's able to get anyone and everyone he wants, because you watch this kid on tape. I know you mentioned Messiah Mickens being the leader of the 2026 class and this Kemon Spell being the 2027 leader. Yeah. And Messiah Mickens, we have ranked 116 in the country. I think this kid's going to be a lot higher ranked than that. This kid has potential to be like a top 5 running back in his class. He's just a very advanced runner. You watch him run. He's very patient. He waits for the blocks to set up, waits for the hole to develop. If you look, I'm looking through my notes. Speed, check. Elusiveness, check. Contact balance, check. Not afraid of contact, also check. Yep. Vision, quickness, big playability. Like this is like a Kaytron Allen 2.0. Like this kid is just a stud as a freshman. I'm eager to see how he develops, but this just seems like a very, very big get. And I know he's not ranked technically yet because 2027.
It's too early.
How do you rank a freshman? But I think he's going to be ranked pretty high when it's all said and done.
And yeah, you being as immersed as you are in the recruiting rankings, you get the chance to talk to all those guys at Rivals. So I'm sure they feel that strongly about Kemon Spell as well. I don't know that he stays at McKeesport for all 4 seasons too. McKeesport isn't a 5A, a 6A school. They are a smaller school. So I wonder, and he can stay in state. He can transfer to a 5A or a 6A school if need be. But if he wants to, kind of like Jasir Rogers, I think that it would benefit him to move out of Delaware and play at an IMG Academy, for example, if he can enroll there. Same thing for Kemon Spell. I think transferring to that's just that. If you want to bolster your recruiting ranking, I'm not advocating that for like a personal, like, hey, this is what you should do academically. That's not what I'm arguing here. But from a ranking, recruiting, evaluation standpoint, there's just not a lot of scouts that are going to go to McKeesport high school games, and you're not going to be showcased like the way a Koby Howard would on ESPN National while you're at McKeesport. That's just the fact of the matter.
I mean, coaches want to see you play against the best competition. If you put up crazy numbers against low-level comps, that's a good start. You also have to do it in these camps against the top-level guys. And when they see the flashes, they're like, okay, let's bring them. That's why these kids end up going to 3 to 4 camps at the same school, because these schools want to see you against the top level possible. Yeah. Going to these top high schools, at the end of the day, that's how it works. And maybe you don't have to go all the way to IMG. You could probably go a lot closer to a bunch of different programs throughout the state of Pennsylvania. A lot of kids from Western PA are now going to Ohio, if you noticed. But that's for a different reason besides the point.
Well, look at Messiah Mickens, who was at Trinity, which I think was a 1A school or a 2A school in Pennsylvania, and now is at Harrisburg, which is a 6A, and that's a fellow teammate now, Kevin Brown, who's also a Penn State commit. That should be a championship contending team at the highest level of high school football in Pennsylvania.
100%. Last but not least, I do want to talk about what you were just saying before about Pitt. We know Narduzzi's kind of a little bit on the hot seat. I shouldn't say kind of. He definitely is on the hot seat. I know it's hard to say because he won the ACC championship a few years back. But if you look at coach's hot seat, they have him ranked number 11 in the country out of all college football coaches. Do you almost wish he just stays there because it's kind of been so easy for Frank Run to just kind of take over? Or because I don't even know who else they could get that would do anything better, to be honest.
In short, yes. I was worried that Pitt was going to take a chance. If we're talking about, from a recruiting standpoint and competition against Penn State, because it's almost too easy, and I want it to stay that way because it helps Penn State on the national scale. Curt Cignetti was a popular candidate across the board at James Madison, and was seriously, look at the results he was producing at James Madison. Well, we all know the connections that the Cignetti family has to Pitt. That would have made so much sense if Pitt said, hey, Narduzzi, we're essentially going to let's just agree to buy you out of your contract. You're not exactly being fired, but we are going to go in a different direction, or which is the same. You know what I mean? It's just agree to move on, go our separate ways kind of thing. Because Curt Cignetti was going to be available. And I am so glad that he is at Indiana and not at Pitt.
Yeah, no, they have to do something this year if you're Pitt. I know this isn't a Pittsburgh Panthers show or anything, but if they don't show any type of progress, I feel like he might be out. And I'll bet you money like they'll try to reach out to Kirk Cignetti. He's not leaving a Big Ten school for a school that might not even have a conference going forward.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, definitely interesting. It is funny though. You always want to keep like your enemies close, but your friends close, but your enemies closer. One of those type of things.
I think Pitt would have hit a home run if they were able to land Kurt Cignetti, but there was no need for a coach, and they didn't feel that a Cignetti. I think you have to look at it this way. That is almost in some ways. I don't think Kurt Cignetti would ever take that personally, but with his connections to Pitt, the fact that there wasn't a conversation that we know of or a discussion that, hey, maybe we should consider moving on from Nardu. Again, that creates that can create a lot of division. I understand why Pitt didn't do, but you either had to go one. So now you made your bed, you have to sleep in it. You decided to align yourself with Narduzzi that has not given you anything aside from the ACC championship. You get more 5-7, 3-9 seasons than you do being around the conversation of one of the best in the country, and it's going to be the same case again. Pitt could finish 5-7 again? That's great. They might not even make a bowl.
Yeah, that's a rough life. We don't have to worry about that though. Anyway, anything else before we sign off today? I know it's kind of a little bit of a long one today between recruiting, team news, all that other good stuff.
Well, there's a lot to catch up on, and there's I don't necessarily want to go back to Jameial Lyons and Kaveion Keys, but this is just this is a difficult start to the season, right? This is how you start training camp. You go from interim suspension to expulsion, and it's not being talked about. And I'm not trying to push the conversation or the discussion further. I'm just curious about team morale. I'm not even talking about Keys and Lyons at this point. Because, again, these are 18 and we're getting past the COVID eligibility, so you don't have as many 24, 25, 26-year-olds playing college sports anymore. Yeah. And I'm glad we're getting away from that. But you have 18 to 22-year-olds. I've said this a lot before. James Franklin leads a highly emotional program because he's a highly emotional guy. Mm-hmm. So like you said to start off the show, Richie, there's a lot of ups and there's also a lot of downs. So the highs are going to be great, but so are the lows in a bad way, but with respect to it. Because we saw that in 2020 when that team was not into it, when they weren't playing, when they had the news about Journey Brown, Noah Cain gets hurt, and all of this stuff goes wrong. You saw that team was supposed to contend for the Big Ten. I know it was the COVID season, but you saw how quickly they checked out. I am just wondering with what we see when the locker room morale isn't that good, what transpires? Is that going to bug them in week 1 against West Virginia, or are they going to be able to have enough time to push past this? That is my biggest concern at this point, aside from all the depth that we talked about. But what we're talking about, fire and passion and everything else, Penn State can be very passionate, but they can also be under passionate as well, if that makes sense.
No, that's a really good point. I didn't even think about the team morale aspect of everything. Yep. You just lost 2 key contributors. Play on words there with Keys, but yeah, no, I mean it's going to hurt the team a little bit. You got to be able to bounce back and get ready to go. This season's what we're talking 3 weeks away, 4 weeks away. You got to be ready. It is a big blow for the first week of practice, but these other guys got to step up. Whether it be I'm in Vanover, Smith Vilbert, who's another guy that's been MIA at defensive end. And you need some of these young guys to step up too. Tony Rojas has to be that guy this year, our linebacker. Tamir Robinson needs to play some reps this year or get some snaps this year. Kari Jackson, like you said, might be getting some snaps this year. You might not have a choice. Yeah. So, but Zach, before we sign off, tell everyone where they can find out more from you and your podcast and social media in general.
I appreciate you having me back on the show, and of course, congratulations to your co-host Dylan on beginning his family. Yes, so that's just obviously incredible, the gift of life. But thank you for having me back on the show. I'm always happy to be a guest. I'm over at Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Similar types of conversations around Penn State football and all the other relevant Penn State sports.
All right. Appreciate it, Zach. For me and Zach, that's another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. Signing off.